You know what? I'll actually turn to Bilal first, who's joining us from Zoom. Bilal, if you could just do a quick introduction, and then we'll get started.
Awesome. Good afternoon. Thank you all for attending this session. I'm not sure if you can just hear me or if you can also see me in Lisbon. It's a little unfair that I can't see you, but both Asa and I were supposed to be there in person with you all. However, due to some delays with my visa, I wasn't able to travel and had to cancel my flight at the last minute. But I'm still very excited to be able to join the event as a virtual speaker and to be with you all today. We'll start with quick intros. So if you're able to go to the next slide.
Yep, absolutely. Sorry, we were trying to figure out, we were trying to make sure that people can see you as well. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll go after you, Asad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for being here this session. I'm the head of learning design. I'm a learning experience specialist working with EdLey, and my background is in learning and instructional design, edtech specifically, designing experiences, for modern, innovative technologies. Bilal.
Thank you. And I'm Fakir. I'm the head of product and one of the co-founders at EdLey, which is the edtech division at Arbisoft. My background is in edtech and enterprise product management for education platforms. EdLey, quick into EdLey as well, is a tech partner for edX and OpenEdX, now TCRAL. Like every year, we're also proud to be one of the sponsors for this event. Moving on, some backstory about why we wanted to talk about this topic with you all today. During the OpenEdX end of celebration event a few months back, Asad and I had an opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing at EdLey on rethinking learner engagement and learner experience while using OpenEdX, specifically in context of workplace learning. We had very positive feedback on that session, and multiple people reached out with ideas for collaboration, which we found very exciting. Some of those conversations later led to fruitful partnerships. So we're excited to focus on some of our key lessons from having enabled workplace learning using OpenEdX for organizations around the world. But why not? This session isn't a sequel to that one. We hope to take advantage of the longer format and do a deeper dive into some of the key principles and insights we had shared in the previous sessions. So what will we cover today? We'll talk about key challenges that affect workplace learning and 5 things we've learned in creating next generation workplace learning products. Next, we'll draw upon proven instructional strategies and best practices in learning experience design and share what focusing on the complete learner experience looks like, what happens before, during, and after a learning event. This holistic approach ensures readiness, maximum engagement, a far transfer of learning on the job. We'll cover this one with a bunch of examples. Finally, we'll show you practical applications of these ideas by leveraging the amazing capabilities of the OpenEdX platform. This is going to be a show and tell, but we hope to spend less time on the tell part and more time showing you real life applications of these insights. So if the first part of the session feels a little bit too theoretical, please bear with us. We'll also target leaving ample time for discussions at the end. So definitely note down any questions or comments and we can get to them at the end. Next, before we start, it would be helpful to do a quick poll with a raise of hands. Since I can't see you all, I'll let Asad take lead on this part. The goal is to kind of get a sense of what you all consider to be #1 challenge with workplace learning as designers or product managers for workplace learning platforms or products. If those labels don't apply to you, you can base it on your experience as a learner or an employee in an organization that takes workplace trainings. Over to you, Asad.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to. So, like Bilal explained, since we're talking about workplace learning, a lot of the talk is going to be about transfer of learning and behavior change, and how do we take the concepts that we deliver in learning experiences and courses, but then how do we see them being applied in real life workplace situations? So if everybody, just with a simple raise of hand, do you want to share what, in your opinion, out of the 5 options is the biggest challenge? Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, so in my opinion, based on the experience I have with our clients, It's C because it's hard to understand what exactly they learned and how they can apply that on their career, even on their job.
Yeah, absolutely. So C, learning outcomes are unclear. Yes. Yep. Anybody else wants to share?
I'll share an experience from being a learner in the workplace. For me, B seemed most pertinent. I think for the most part, you often are just trying to get on with the day-to-day tasks, and you feel like you could probably just learn things by doing the actual work. And so the training is like almost like a box that you need to tick, and often it's not taken as seriously as it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you can get away with just ticking or checking that box, I mean, why bother taking it seriously? I mean, that's definitely a concern. I think it's shared by a lot of workplace management staff, especially us as instructional designers. So it's good to hear the perspective of a learner. So I think it's a truth. It's a reality. Definitely option B and C. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have, only the one right reply on the answer on this question. So for different projects, we have different reason why it could be the biggest hurdle to transfer of the learning in the workplace. So sometimes we don't have enough money. it's true, and just we talk about it. So, and sometimes where the learners don't take training seriously, and also sometimes the content is irrelevant. So yes, I think we don't have the only one correct reply or answer to this question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And before I pass it on to Bilal, I will say that this is, in a way, a trick question. There isn't one right answer to it. Perhaps all of them are, in a way, big challenges, like massive challenges, and we'll be talking about them in the context of designing workplace learning. So Bilal, as you can see, I think we have somewhat of a consensus that there's different challenges depending on where we're coming from. So Bilal?
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of your insights. And I think they both resonate with us than me because, you're echoing the challenges that we face pretty much on a daily basis. So moving on, I want to share some disclaimers about the learning insights or the lessons that we want to share with you today. We don't want to oversell. These ideas aren't necessarily going to be revolutionary. We'll try to offer a new perspective on things that you're already familiar with. Oftentimes, these are things that are not done right. It's usually because these ideas are sometimes directly borrowed from other contexts like higher ed and K-12, and sometimes applied without modification to the context of workplace learning. We also want to make sure that we cover these ideas in context of implementing them through an open edX-based learning or training platform. We'll talk about these ideas specifically in context of workplace learning, and most of these ideas, like I said, can be applied to other contexts, but the devil is going to be in the details. So how they apply in different contexts like K-12 is going to look very, very different. Next, the first lesson that we want to share with you all is that it's fun to be social. A slightly less catchy way of saying that is that being able to enable social components in the learning experience, leveraging the capabilities of the learning platform to enable peer-to-peer collaborative learning, helps take the learning to the next level. So whatever you have right now, if you're able to borrow or embed some components of social learning, more often than not, you'll be able to improve learner engagement. So what's the key idea here? It's a pretty basic one: social learning and peer-to-peer collaborative learning, where learners have shared same learning goals are able to learn from each other, and they have a system that allows for that to happen. Why is that so important? So employees' experiences and think of all the employees or talent at your organization, that cumulative knowledge and experience is one of the most major assets to most organizations. And if you're able to leverage that in a way where individual members of staff can learn from that directly as well as indirectly, that can be a game changer. So learning isn't happening through a course or through an individual person. It's not a course. In most contexts, learning is happening directly or indirectly based on your interactions with other people or consequences that you see other people face, whether positive or negative. And the other detail about social learning is that people rely on input from other people to calibrate their behavior. Once they know, what's working, or once they get feedback from other people or customers about what's working or what isn't working, they're able to self-regulate their behavior. And that's also a key part of learning. And a good learning platform can support ways for doing that. It also leads to more active participation, hence higher learner engagement. Another key thing that social learning enables is that it allows for richer learning experiences, because you're learning from people which have diverse views. They may have views where they don't agree with you, and being able to learn from all those different perspectives makes you better off as a learner. We also want to cover some best practices when it comes to social learning, and we'll look into specific concrete examples of these shortly. The goal is to encourage participation and bake it into the design of your learning product, to not consider it as an afterthought or an extra. In most MOOCs out there, including, for example, some of the MOOCs on edX.org, they have varying degree of social learning integration, but in most cases, it's just the discussion forum being used for ice breaking, asking people to share which country they're from, or sharing the key takeaway from a lesson. And obviously all those are great examples, but they barely scratch the surface of what can be possible through social learning. So we want to, later in this talk, explore some ideas with you all about how social learning can help integrate the different learners in the organization more directly in supporting their learning process. We also want to talk about providing the right tools and resources to your employees and staff members. We'll share some specific examples of that. And opening more than one channel for communication, so discussion forum and using other ways where employees have a way of learning from each other. That's one of the goals that we have for social learning when it comes to a lot of different projects that we're enabling. In most discussion forums that are part of different MOOC courses, I'm sure you've noticed that your activity or the quality of your activity doesn't count towards your grade. It has no bearing on your the outcome of the training. And that's a missed opportunity in our opinion. So one of the projects that we've enabled in collaboration with Philanthropy University for their learning product that's powered by OpenEdX, we looked at different ways of measuring the quality of the learner's activity in these different social interactions and the discussion forum, and gamifying that process. So based on how many questions you answered for other people, or how many posts you did, just in sheer number, you will be eligible for different badges. And that's one way to do that. And we'll also look into some other ways that we enable that in the case study that we'll do shortly. Moving on, the next lesson is to break it down. Yes, no points for guessing. We're talking about microlearning. What's the idea? We're now basically designing training for goldfishes. Most people are struggling with declining attention span. Numerous studies have shown challenges that all people, especially younger people, face. Our attention span is measurably reducing over time. There's so much going on. More things are begging for our attention. Most progressive workplaces encourage an easygoing environment, which is ripe with distractions. And that obviously has a major impact on how we learn now. Most learners would rather not sit through hours and hours of compliance training, which is why, not surprisingly, most learning and development professionals have been early in recognizing value of successful incorporation of
Bilal, can you hear us?
there are oftentimes content experts or folks from the management where
Bilal, if you
there's a
can hear
temptation.
us, you might want to repeat, let's say the last 15 seconds. I think we lost you for a little bit.
Oh, I'm
Disaster in the
sorry. Yeah, for
technology
sure.
world.
Yeah. So, well, so the idea of most people suffering with reducing time span. So the metaphor of us as content designers or product managers creating learning products, basically for goldfishes. And there's a lot of research out there showing how this is affecting young people more specifically. And one major impact of that is on how we learn. And an example of that is that most people don't want to sit through hours and hours of training, and instructional designers and learning product designers and learning experience specialists have been good at recognizing value of microlearning, and they have found different ways of incorporating or leveraging the idea of microlearning in context of work-based learning. However, they face a challenge in balancing conflicting priorities. What tends to happen, in like real life settings is that there's a temptation or interest from other people, including the subject matter expert or the management, to cram as much learning outcomes in a single learning product. And while these notions are well intentioned, the goal of increasing content and hope to get more learning is simply not how that works, right? And presenting that content in a way that is very relevant and hyper focused on specific objectives or performance outcomes and available in bite sized and manageable chunks is what we're trying to accomplish by leveraging microlearning in context of workplace trainings. So let's use an example of a sales training that could happen, in cases of most organizations that have a sales department. So if we're responsible for designing the sales training product, it is important for the trainees or the learners to know, the context of the organization, know what the different products are, or the industry that the organization operates in, or who the customers are. But when we're designing a training on, for example, let's use a specific example of conducting an effective sales demo, that's what the training needs to focus on. Sometimes for the content designers, there's an urge to talk about other stuff like what are the different types of demos and why demos are important. And that is an example of what not to do in a training based on microlearning. It should just be focused on how to conduct effective demos. This isn't to say that those other informations aren't important for the learners to know. And in the context of this session, where the learners are the employees, so those other learnings are definitely important. But microlearning gives you the flexibility to create self-sufficient pieces of learning blocks, and those learning outcomes and the learning blocks for them can be stringed together. So those other ideas that need to be covered can covered in that way. And now for best practices. One best practice is obviously to keep it lean and hyper-focused, which is the inherent goal of microlearning. Here's a litmus test that we at Edley use when creating content. If the content has multiple learning outcomes, we ask ourselves if it does. It's not micro enough. Then you're supposed to break it down further and further until it's very targeted for very specific goals. When it comes to microlearning, less is always more. Clutter-free presentation of key content is what the goal is. It is also helpful to segregate the content into what is neat to know and nice to know, and you can organize your microlearning modules in that manner. Support from mobile is very helpful in microlearning, especially being able to consume those blocks of content on the go. We'll show you what that looks like in practice in our case study. And the key goal is to not just rely on videos or one type of content based on what's suitable, introduce variety of formats, think beyond videos. Think about what is most suitable delivery format for the particular learning outcome or outcomes you're working on. So that was about microlearning in context of workplace learning. I'll tag Asad now to cover the remaining lessons. Over to you, Asad.
Awesome. Thank you, Bilal. Sorry, can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So actually, before I move on to lesson 3, I just want to take a moment and basically just pause and reflect, which is actually happens to be our third lesson as well. So I think you talked about the learning outcomes not being clear. Sorry, I think you talked about learning outcomes not being clear as one of the challenges, right? Which is very true. I wanna ask. What Bilal just explained about microlearning and the hyper focus on making sure that every piece of microlearning module, let's say, is focused on one learning objective, learning outcome that is specific, that's relevant, that's measurable, that's time bound, but then also the performance outcomes. Do you think there is value from your experience, let's say, be it as a content designer, as a learning designer, or as somebody who's taking the training, do you think there's value if you break down learning outcomes into specific concrete objectives and then design training around that one objective while making sure there is no scope creep happening? To give you an example, let's say I want to create a product on how to fry fish. Really, I think that's the first example that's coming to mind. Really, it's not the best example of workplace learning product, but I think it will illustrate the idea. Now, when I think about what I want to cover in that quick little training session, I might think about, well, I want to tell my learners a little bit about how to prepare the fish, how to marinate it, maybe, how do they take care of the safety, what to do with the stove, the oven and whatnot. I might want to tell them about what specific type of fish this is and what are some specific curation processes for this fish. I may want to tell them if this comes from the ocean, if this comes from the river, if this is a farmed fish, the list goes on and on and on. And we fall trapped to that as learning designers quite a lot. And no offense to subject matter experts, just by the way, I love working with all SMEs, but frankly speaking, more often than we'd like to admit, a lot of this is coming from subject matter experts. Imagine somebody having a wealth of knowledge. They're dying to share, right? But just how much do you want to share with the learner? Just how much is the learner receptive to, right? That does not mean whatever I'm going to transfer everything, just dump all of that content onto the learner, which is why it's really important to be hyper-focused. And that's what microlearning allows us to do. So if I'm making a training on how to fry fish, that's what I want to do. I can have another training product on where does that fish come from, how to prepare for it. But this session or this lecture is going to be about frying the fish. So best practices of frying, anything that's related to that. So that's really one way that we can not fall prey to the scope creep of learning design, right? So I just wanted to reflect on that a little quick. I hope that helps. But do you think it's a different way to look at it? Do you think there's value in leveraging microlearning? If you want to share. Yeah.
Okay, I understand the concept of microlearning. When I was talking about the outcome is not clear, I mostly meant how do people use that in their lives?
Yeah.
How do we know that they learn it in our course? So as a corporate training, for instance, how do we measure?
Perfect.
Like that. But in general, I agree. I like what you are talking about.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, I have one. I have one question to the the first step, and also the next. If we talk about microlearning, maybe you can advise which size. I mean, the seat time of the course. It's good to use the microlearning because, for example, if I open the course with more than 100 units with a small video, of course, well, like 1-2 minutes, not one, but it's 3-4 minutes, so I can count it like 4 and I have 100 units with 4 minutes video. Okay, I don't want to, it's like, oh my god, I will learn this for the whole of my life. So maybe the size for the course, or maybe you can advise which seat time. So if we have a course more than 2 hours, so we can use a microlearning. But if we have a course for 3, 4, 5, 6 and more hours, so maybe it's not a good idea. It's like a weakness, not it's like an advantage for microlearning.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if you have any advice for the size of the course to use the microlearning, I will like appreciate your reply. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very valid concern. There's a good thing and a bad thing that I have to share with you. The bad thing is that there's no one size fits all approach. We can't really say this is a good ballpark, let's say at the course, there's certain things that we can use data and try to understand, okay, this size of let's say content could be turned into microlearning, but unfortunately that's not possible. The good side, on the other hand, is that it's often evident from there are different factors. For example, sometimes the content can be really long, but the concepts are very I would say easy to understand. It's not dense content. There's not layers of content. It's not nuanced, right? It's very simple content. That's for cases like that, it's easier to split that. So we'll actually cover that in a little bit. I think lesson 4 and 5 are jointly about that, so we'll get to that a little bit. And I want to be mindful of the time as well. So when we say pause and reflect, we're really just talking about reflective learning. We've all heard of reflective pedagogy. It's not a new concept. Perfect. So sorry, just to clarify, is that 10 minutes for the total session, or? Okay, perfect, awesome. So yeah, so it's really, the idea is learning by doing, like going actionable, going, really practical, but also pausing and taking an opportunity to think about what we've learned, contemplating, pondering. And when we do that, we kind of step away from an autopilot approach, because like you just mentioned, let's say I have hundreds of slides, and trust me, I've seen courses like that. I've seen ones with 200 slides, and I can guarantee you, yes. So most learners will be on autopilot, because all that's on their mind at that moment is to click next and get to the end of it, take an assessment, and get done. So we need to build meaningful opportunities where they pause and reflect. Now, reflection is all about asking great questions. Again, just like Bilal mentioned in social learning, we need to go beyond the surface level questions like, what did you think about this? What did you learn from it? What were your opinions? We really need to dig deeper. We need to give them an opportunity. That's why it's important. We need to design effective prompts. Now, why is this important? Super quickly, first and foremost, learning how to learn, metacognition. We need to empower the learners. They need to know what their learning processes are like, right? So without thinking deeply about how we learn, it's very difficult for us to gain insight into how I learn. I wouldn't be able to control my own learning. So it allows us to do, self-regulated learning, give learners more autonomy. And then it fosters basically meaning making and sense making, which basically means that if I learn something, I want to know what that means in the context of my real life. And you talked a little bit about behavior change, right? So point 4 here is that the powerful combination of pondering, questioning, challenging, and re-examining assumptions, what it does is it's a big step towards behavior change, because now I've thought about something, and we'll actually talk about this real quick.
Could I just quickly add something for the virtual audience? Julia Mullins said that Grant Wiggins' Understanding by Design walks through this process. What do you want them to know? How will you know they know it? That will tell you what content you need. I'm hearing an echo myself. Now just break those pieces into chunks that are appropriate and can stand alone. So
oh, absolutely. Wiggins' Understanding by Design, I absolutely love. It's something that's part of, let's say, our design practice in general, and that's really the idea, right? Breaking it down. The look that we have here is, let's say we want it to be inclusive to all kinds of designers, but let's say, obviously, when talking about workplace learning, there's so many different types of content that you could be designing. There are courses, let's say, if I want to make a training on, let's say, cybersecurity practices, it's very different than creating a training that's more, dense, like about racism, like how do I, like harassment prevention and things like that. So that's why we want to be mindful of what does reflection mean in the context of different types of training. Some topics are concrete, others are more, nuanced. So again, we don't have a lot of time, but just very quickly, who here who is a learning designer or instructional designer has ever been hesitant or afraid to include reflection prompts because you thought that the learners, you don't know what they'll type, you don't know what they'll answer. How would you know if it's right or wrong? Can't we just tell them and things like that? I'm guilty of doing that. Great. and there's no judgment, right? So we think about like what's the value, but really we need to understand that we have to trust our learners. Remember, these are employees who are working for your organization. You trust them with sensitive jobs. They're doing work for you, but you don't trust them to type something in, or it's really, in the spirit of trusting your employees, we have to provide that opportunity, and it's a hard step. Like you have to take a leap of faith, I would say, but then the results are amazing, and we've felt that, and that's why we're sharing this lesson, because we have felt that over time by incorporating reflective learning in the products, and the feedback that we've gotten is amazing. So this is a slightly adapted version of Graham Gibbs' reflective cycle. So really, give them an opportunity to think about what's the situation and the experience. So I think someone in the audience talked about how do we know if this is going to be applied. So if I want to think about, let's say, I'll give you one quick example. I created a training on harassment prevention, and we talked about what kind of behaviors can be unacceptable for certain people and can lead to traumatic events. And one version of the training in the control group we had was, we tell somebody that if you shout at somebody, or if you have loud, or violence or anything like that, can have really negative impacts on people. But then the other version of our experimental group was where we, instead of telling them that, we basically made them contemplate, what do you think would happen if somebody shouted at you, right? What if, along with the shouting, they banged their fist at your desk? What if they said something behind your back? What if on that particular day you were having a bad day yourself, you were struggling with a mental health issue? How would that impact you? And by going through that cycle, like, what would you feel? Then, would you like that experience? Would you not like that experience? And once they've done that, conclude, well, would you want that experience to repeat? And once they've done that, then help them develop an action plan. Well, the next time you have an urge to shout somebody, think about this. Now that they've gone through that reflective cycle process, it's much likely to stick in their head, as opposed to me just telling the same thing. It's literally the same content. But here, what I've done is I've involved the learner into the process. So it's a deeper integration of that concept, right? So best practices, number one, trust your learners, provide meaningful prompts, go beyond the superficial, don't hesitate to challenge the learners. Not all learners like it, but trust me, there's value in it. And provide structure to support self-reflection. Our lesson number 4 is go with the flow, workflow. Workflow, what we mean by designing in the flow of work is that provide performance support. Instead of me wanting to tell everybody the same training, as it doesn't apply the same way to everybody, like provide content that is very specific to their job. And for this one, you know what, it's about learning by doing. And I'm gonna keep it very, very simple. Instead of designing always, biased towards creating courses, think about preparing job aids, resources, toolkits. How do you manage certain things in your context of, and for this one, I have a little story. So I designed a training on diversity and inclusion. We had a manager, a team lead, was the HR. They had taken over and over again a version of diversity and inclusion training. So they understand the concepts, always acing all the quizzes, everything. They know the concepts of diversity and inclusion, how they apply it to our organization, or the set organization that I'm designing this for. But then the same manager who's really good with those solid foundation understanding, when they're sitting in an interview and they're conducting an interview for candidates, they aren't able to fight their unconscious biases, discriminate against certain candidates, let's say if it's from a different gender, different sexual orientation, different race, ethnicity. Why? They know that they're trying to be inclusive. They just don't know how to do it when they're in that context of, taking an interview, because that's the real challenge. So we're training them not when they're sitting in front of the computer, but we need to train them for when they're actually sitting in the interview room. But that never happens because there's a big disconnect. So we need to cover that disconnect. And how do we do that? Embed learning into your workflow. So for this particular this particular hiring manager, the Diversity and Inclusion Foundations training was very little value. What they needed was a toolkit. So of course, provide them with that basic foundation, but then provide them with the toolkit. How do you conduct inclusive hiring? How do you recognize your unconscious biases? And once you've done that, how do you fight those biases? That is never covered in those trainings because the training was just generic for everybody. So that's the idea here. And then finally, think about the moment of needs. We know that Bob Mosher and Conrad Goffredson basically talked about the 5 moments of need. Learners typically their curiosity and motivation is heightened. I think we have a couple of minutes, so I'll try to keep it very quick. Is when 5 of these situations occur. Number 1, when they need to apply something that they've learned. That's when they're interested in learning. Because most of the times they're taking training because they've been asked to. HR wants you to do compliance training, right? Or I don't know, there's a certificate that needs to be generated, or your job, you're going to lose your job or whatnot, right? There's a long list. But then when does the learner actually want to do it? One, when they need to apply something and they can't do it. It's fundamental to their job. The second moment of need is when they've been given a challenge or a problem to solve and now they're clueless. That's when they're probably looking for a resource. Okay, so we need to leverage those moments. The third moment is when something changes. Say you move to a new building, a new boss came in, a new software that you're using in your company, a new regulation, a new law that was passed. So that's a moment of need. They need that learning, so they want to know about it. When new information is imparted for the first time, something that they've never learned before. And then finally, when what they know already is not good enough, right? They know that they know something, but it's not good enough. That's when they're actually motivated. Yeah. So the 5 moments of need, like all of them? Sorry. Yeah, so I'll quickly repeat them. Learners' motivation and curiosity and their interest in the learning is heightened at 5 of these key moments. Number 1, when they need to apply something that they've learned. Number 2, when they've been given a challenge or a problem to solve. Number 3, when there's a change in the system, in the process, in the team, in the structure, a person, something like that. When there's a change involved, they want to learn. When there's new information that is imparted for the first time, it's fundamental. It's really important here. When something is new to them, it's coming for the first time. Curiosity. We're all humans. We want to know because I don't know about this, and we all want to know. And then finally, what they know when they know that what they know is not good enough. That's where they're like, oh, there's a sense of self inadequacy. They're okay. I want to, peaks. So those are the 5 key moments of need. And in workflow learning, we need to leverage those 5 moments, recognize them, and then provide training in those moments. And provide them in a way, the best practice here is ensure that the purpose is to provide performance support. Make sure your learners don't feel like it's another requirement. Oh, I have to binge do a training that's 70 hours. What I'm going to do is like wait until the end of this quarter and just sit down on a Friday and then do all of my trainings together. No. When it's embedded in the workflow, they want to do it as it comes when the learning need comes. Okay, I think the final one, everything is part of an ecosystem. That's the culmination. That's the crux of everything that we've talked about today. And I'm sorry, I think we managed the time a little bit. So I think I'll cover this one super quick. The idea here really is that the learning process never stops. And so the learning should not stop. The provision of support should not stop. As long as the learner is on the job, it's an opportunity to learn. So you need to provide an environment, basically, where they're always learning job aids, toolkits, resources, and all of that. And this can happen not in a particular platform. If you have a mobile app that you can leverage, do that. If you can provide snippets or nuggets of information through emails, do that. Little micro-learning pieces delivered right into their inboxes. If you want to use the physical environment in the workplace, do that. So that's really about understanding that it's all part of an ecosystem. An online training or a self-paced training or an instructor-led training alone is only 10%. We all know about the 70, 20, and 10, or I'm assuming we all know about the 70, 20, and 10 framework, which says that 70% of learning comes from what we're doing. 20% comes from when we see other people doing it, and the only 10% comes from what we were told in training. The problem, unfortunately, is that we're focusing too much on the 10% and basically disregarding the rest of the 90%. So let's change that, right? That's the idea. For any good learning ecosystem, this is my final slide, I promise, is really that there needs to be good content, there needs to be a good strategy, a good culture, good technology, and then people who are willing to learn, who actually want to learn. Yeah, and then with that, I think I'm going to have to skip through this. Really, I think I actually covered this. So with the ecosystem, have a decentralized process. No matter how you can deliver it, deliver it. All right, how are we doing on? Okay, well, so we wanted to show a very quick case study of a product that we recently built, which means that we might, but I mean, I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A as well. How are we feeling in terms of questions and answers? What should we? Yeah, okay, perfect. So let's say I'm gonna sign in here. This is a product that that we did for a client, and the idea here really is that a lot of what we talked about is basically going to come to life. Oh, think it's a European keyboard. How do I do the at? Pardon? Alt 2? I don't. Sorry, I think this is. Nothing happens with the alt. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Sorry about this. Okay, so yeah, so let's say this is a course that we take. So this is all built with the Open edX platform, and we've like customized the theme a little bit. The good thing about this is obviously, this course leverages discussions in a whole new level, and I wish we had the time to go over them. But some of the things that I will go over them is, as you see, the format here is a little bit different. It's like a library of videos that you see on the left-hand side. So we worked a little bit on the user experience. The learners are more in control of what's happening. They can see that. The navigation is a lot easier. Some of the things that we've done is obviously, so let's say this is an example of a discussion forum that we customized for, so just a little bit of the theming. So we introduced different types of prompts. So to go beyond the superficial, learners have the options of asking a question. They have the option of starting a discussion point. They have the option of upvoting or downvoting another person's comment, liking it, following it. They have the option of posing a challenge, for example. So a challenge, they have the option of conducting a poll, using the discussion forum that we are familiar with in the Open edX platform. So really what we've done is we've taken what the Open edX platform provides and then customized it to really incorporate all of those things. And other things like, when we talk about reflective learning, so we built this little X block that allows us to do, and we know like in-video quizzes, that are there. So we basically customize all of them. I wish I could play this video for you. I think the idea again is for us to provide prompts for reflection in the process of learning. So yeah, so things like that, we can make them timed, we can grade them, and things like that. So it's really about building that ecosystem. We have a microlearning modules that can stay. We're using the content library to deliver microlearning modules that sit inside a course. So things like that. Any questions? Yes, please.
More than anything, this is a question about something that we talked previously, especially social learning, which is something that is really hard for us to engage with, especially as well with our SMEs, like you said, because we have, at least in my experience, we have a lot of issues with what I call meaningful interaction. So the idea of creating interaction between students that gives something back, because I've participated in some courses and I've built some other courses where when you ask somebody what you think about some subject, they just respond, oh yes, I think it's bad or wrong, and that's that, and you don't have something that you can meaningfully take advantage of. And my second question is, how can we grade some of these experiences in a way that the academia can understand?
Yes. Yeah, I think both really great question. I think the first one is relatively easier to answer. I think the key really lies in the discussion prompts. At the core of it, the essence is that the discussion prompt. So you yourself just mentioned asking questions like, what did you learn, for example, what was your experience? So I think those just like keeping it as open-ended is generally not a good idea. Instead, ask a very specific question, and if you make the discussion prompt super specific, you can expect a super specific reply. The problem, again, we fall prey to asking questions like, what was your experience? What did you learn from this module? And imagine as a learner, the amount of thinking and planning I have to do by the time I'm like, you know what, forget it, it's not graded in any way. Like, why do I want to engage with something I'm not being graded for, things like that. So it's really important to design the prompts that are meaningful. The second part of your question, and I know it's not easy, trust me, but it takes a culture, it takes a conscious effort, continuous effort, but like I said, the results are there. The second part, grading, I think that's the beauty of the Open edX platform, from open response assessments to basically, peer, again, if we're talking about peer-to-peer learning, like in academia, peer review is a concept. it actually comes from academia. So if we embed that idea into workplace learning, what do other people think? Can they validate what you're saying? Are their experiences also like that? What you're saying, does that hold true for X number of people who are also working in similar roles, right? What does your manager think? What about the higher level organizational leadership think, right? So it's not grading in the sense that you'll get a X%, 10%, but it's more like reflecting on what you think, what other people think about that, and then engaging in discourse and dialogue. Because by engaging in discourse and dialogue, that's still grading. We want validation of our ideas. Like, would that be fair to say? If you have an idea, especially if you're being vulnerable, sharing your idea in front of the public, you kind of need some validation, unless, especially in the context of workplace learning, because, it has to be a safe environment. So that's an idea that we need to move a little bit away from concrete summative gradings like A, B, C letter grading, or because it's rarely meaningful. Instead, a grading that's more informal, that's more formative through comments and feedbacks. I hope that answers the question. Yes, please.
This has to be the last question. Sorry.
I'll make it quick. When you're adding someone to your team that's supposed to build courses, like a classical course designer, what resources do you give them? What books should they read? What courses should they watch?
For designing courses?
Yes.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think there is quite a lot. I think one of the courses that I always recommend to people who are designing courses, even if this is not an instructional design course, is to understand how cognition works, right? So there's a very famous course, Learning How to Learn by Dr. Barbara Oakley. That's my go-to recommendation for people, just to understand how the human mind perceives knowledge, information, how we connect dots, put them together, because once you understand that theory of the learning science, you can be a better instructional designer. I have a master's in education. I've been in the field of instructional design, but trust me, the amount of knowledge that I've understood or gained from understanding the learning, the the cognitive side of it, is far more than what a master's degree, for example, could teach me in instructional design and learning design. So that's one of the basic recommendations. Okay.
I have a question for you afterwards, but we should finish up the survey page.
Yes, please.
Thank you, everyone. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure and lovely to see all of you, and thank you for sticking by and being patient with the time management. No, we did. Yes, please.
Yeah, there's 4 minutes or 3 minutes now until the next session.
All right.
Sorry for taking everyone's time.
Well, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much. Do we take the offline question now, or coming through? Sorry. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Especially with the gamification, being on the rise, and a lot of and experiential learning in general, we do get a lot of requests about immersive learning. Like, the goal is, we want learners to get immersed into the training product, and just-in-time assessments and questions, scenario-based activities, simulations that are very real-world-like simulations that are 3D using technologies like Unity and modeling. Definitely, there's a lot of interest, but it's a nascent field. It's still very developing. It's still emerging. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.